Before we begin, I must warn you. Some stories from history were not forgotten by accident. They were erased because those in power knew the truth was too dangerous. But now that you are here, you will hear every forbidden detail. So subscribe to this channel and comment where you are watching from. Because what you are about to learn was buried for more than 2 centuries. Yet history has a habit of clawing its way back from the dead. This tale takes us to Lima, Peru. The year was 1803. Spain still ruled with an iron crown. The city of Lima shone like a golden jewel in South America. But even the brightest jewel can hide a crack. And inside one of the most powerful homes in Peru, a horror was growing in secret. The Palacios de Aguirre mansion was huge and beautiful. It covered almost a whole block in the wealthy district of San Lazaro. Its walls were painted a soft yellow and its balconies looked down on busy streets filled with merchants and soldiers. 47 servants kept everything perfect. They cleaned, they cooked, they waited on every command. And among them were 23 enslaved people. They worked day and night so the family inside could enjoy luxury. At the top of this social mountain stood Marquise Catalina de Aguirre y Velasco. She was respected, feared and admired by everyone in Lima. Her late husband, the Marquis Fernando Palacios, had built their fortune through loyalty to the Spanish crown. After he died, the Marquise ruled the home like a general. At age 43 she was still powerful and proud. Her word ruined reputations. Her approval shaped futures. To anger her was to lose everything. The Marquise had 3 daughters. Isabella was 24 and promised to marry a young nobleman from Spain. Adriana was 22, sharp and intelligent, a woman who liked to ask too many questions. Sophia was 19, gentle and dreamy, often lost in her thoughts during social gatherings. These women were the perfect symbols of high society. Elegant, proper, untouchable. But something sinful lurks even in the most beautiful homes. Domingo entered this household 6 years earlier. He had been bought at auction after a sugar plantation went bankrupt. He was described in the ledger as 30 years old, in excellent shape, literate in Spanish and Portuguese, skilled in carpentry and metalwork. That detail, his literacy, was unusual. Slave owners hated the idea of an educated slave. It made them harder to control. Domingo was quiet. He kept his eyes down and his hands busy. He fixed furniture, repaired doors, built shelves in the library where Adriana spent her days. He stood beside Isabella while measuring her windows. He worked in the Marquise's private chambers. He moved among the family more than any other enslaved person. And though he spoke very little, his silence seemed to carry knowledge that others did not understand. Servants whispered that Domingo was different. He watched everything. He listened. And sometimes there was something in his eyes. Something that did not belong to a man who was owned. Something dangerous. Life in the mansion followed strict routines. Morning prayers in the chapel at exactly 6. Breakfast in the dining room with silver plates and fine bread. Social visits in the afternoon. Charity work. Evening prayers. A perfect clock. A perfect world. Until March of 1803. The servants noticed changes. Isabella arrived late for chapel with a pale face. Adriana stayed inside with the windows closed. Sophia suddenly ate strange foods and asked for more every night. And the Marquise, the woman who commanded fear across Lima, began to tremble when she prayed. Her voice cracked. Her hands shook. She snapped at staff for tiny mistakes. The head seamstress was the first to speak the truth. All 4 women needed larger dresses. Their waists had changed. Their bodies had changed. The signs were clear. They were pregnant. All 4. At the same time. But no one had seen a suitor. No one had heard whisper of a wedding. No rings. No courting. Nothing that could explain the impossible. Fear crawled through the mansion halls. The morning of August 14th began like any other. Fires were lit. Bread baked. The servants prepared the table with polished silver. The bell rang and everyone gathered in the chapel for prayers. But only Adriana appeared. She knelt alone, her face white as bone. Father Calderon, the priest, stopped mid-prayer. In 6 years he had never seen the family miss chapel. Not even once. Where were they? After the prayers he rushed to Adriana. His voice shook as he asked about her mother and sisters. Adriana did not look up. Her lips barely parted. You need to see for yourself, father. In the blue room. Hurry. The blue room was the Marquise's private space. Only the most trusted were allowed inside. Father Calderon followed Adriana through the mansion, his heart beating faster with every step. Señora Vargas, the head housekeeper, followed behind, fearing the worst. The door was open a little. The priest pushed it gently. He froze. Inside, the marquise sat in her tall velvet chair. Isabella and Sophia sat beside her. Their gowns were loose and flowing. Their hair unbrushed. Their faces blank. The sunlight lit their swollen bellies. There was no doubt now. They were pregnant, all three, and their bodies showed they were far along. Father Calderon could not speak. His brain tried to form a question, but the horror was too large. Finally his voice tore out of his throat. Who was the father? The marquise lifted her eyes. And what he saw there was not shame. It was something darker, something old, something cursed. Adriana stepped forward. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she whispered the name that would shatter an empire. Domingo, the enslaved man, property, beneath their feet in the structure of society. Yet he had touched the highest members of the household. All of them, even their mother. The priest stumbled backward, crossing himself. His legs shook. His voice nearly cracked in terror. This is impossible. All four of you. How? The marquise finally spoke. Her voice was low, frozen, a voice that knew she had lost control of everything. We were not seduced, father. We were chosen. If you want part 2, let me know and I will continue this forbidden story. And remember, subscribe and tell me in the comments which country or state you are watching from so we can bring more hidden history to light. Part 2. The walls are listening. Before we continue, I need to ask you one thing. Do you believe that every secret eventually demands a price? History is full of sins that the powerful tried to bury. But the truth remains patient. It waits. It festers. Then it rises with claws. If you are brave enough to follow this story until the end, subscribe to this channel and comment where you are watching from, because what happened in that blue room would soon become one of the darkest scandals in colonial history. Now let us return to Lima in the year 1803. The blue room of the Palacios de Aguirre mansion was filled with sunlight and horror. Father Calderon stood frozen, staring at the three pregnant women and the marquise, their swollen bellies undeniable proof of a nightmare that no one could have imagined. His trembling hands clutched the crucifix around his neck. His voice cracked as he whispered a prayer under his breath. A prayer for guidance. A prayer for mercy. The marquise's voice cut through the air with the strength of a woman who had commanded servants, soldiers and noblemen her entire life. Close the door, father. What we discuss must stay inside these walls. He obeyed and the heavy door shut with a soft thud. Outside, Señora Vargas stood guard, her heart pounding. She pressed her ear close enough to catch fragments of the voices inside. Every word could change the fate of the household she had served faithfully for 30 years. Inside the room, Father Calderon struggled to form sentences. His training had taught him about sin, temptation and even madness. But nothing in his years of service prepared him for this. 4 pregnancies, no husbands, no visitors, no rumors, nothing that made sense. He looked from face to face. Isabella crying quietly, Sophia staring down, trying not to shake, Adriana holding herself stiff and calm as if she had already accepted her fate. And then the marquise sitting like a queen punished by God. When did this begin? He finally managed to ask. Adriana answered in a calm, clear voice. February. Different times for each of us, but all within 6 weeks. Father Calderon swallowed hard. His next question felt like a judge swinging an axe. Who was responsible? Silence. Only the sound of Isabella gasping for breath. The marquise raised her chin. Her eyes filled with something sharp and cold. Domingo. The carpenter. The slave. The priest nearly collapsed. His mind roared with disbelief. A slave. A man with no rights, no status, no power. Yet he had done the unthinkable. He had touched every woman in the house. That is not possible. That cannot be. The rules of society, the order of God himself. He struggled to breathe. How did he gain such access? How did he move through this house without anyone suspecting? The marquise's jaw tightened. He fixed doors, moved furniture, built shelves, always with purpose, always at the right moment, and always when we were alone. Her voice changed then. It did not carry fear. It carried anger, shame, something more complex. Father Calderon searched her expression for signs of force. The church taught that an enslaved person could never be the aggressor. But nothing about the Marquise's face suggested helplessness. And that unsettled him more than anything else. We must inform the viceroy. We must bring justice to this house. This is a grave crime. No, the Marquise's answer came like a sword slicing through hope. Absolutely not. If this becomes official, our name is ruined. We become an example of disgrace. Isabella's marriage will end. Adriana's future will be destroyed. Sophia will be mocked and pitied until her last breath. And I will be remembered as a woman who failed her own bloodline. But the truth will come out. Father Calderon insisted. Adriana stepped forward. Not if we control it. Not if you help us. Her voice did not shake like her sister's. She had a plan. A dangerous one. A conspiracy was born in that moment. It did not come from evil intent but from fear. Fear of losing power. Fear of becoming the subject of gossip in salons and churches. Fear of being judged by those who had committed sins just as dark. Father Calderon wiped sweat from his brow. His thoughts spun like a storm. His sacred duty demanded honesty and punishment for sin. But the Marquise's eyes reminded him that the church also valued influence. And the Palacios de Aguirre name was powerful. He wanted to escape this room, this house, this entire nightmare. Instead he heard himself ask the question that would define everything from this moment forward. Where is Domingo now? The Marquise answered with a voice as sharp as steel. The cellar. We locked him away last night. The priest crossed himself 3 times. There were rules for punishing slaves, but those rules were rarely followed when the elite felt threatened. The Marquise rose from her chair holding her belly with one hand. She looked older in that moment. Not defeated, but frightened by a future she could not control. You will speak to him, Father. You will hear his confession. And then you will help us decide what must be done. Help you. His voice faltered. Decide what must be done. He understood exactly what she meant. And the thought made him sick. Adriana touched his arm. If you refuse, Father, everyone in this house will fall together. Even you. Because you will have failed to protect the church from scandal. And Lima never forgets a failure. The priest closed his eyes. He could hear the sound of his own heartbeat echoing in his ears. The trap had closed around him. He belonged to their secret now. Senora Vargas knocked softly on the door. The blue room fell silent. The Marquise breathed in deeply, preparing herself to face the world beyond those walls again. Before we continue, I must ask you something, Father. When you speak to Domingo, look into his eyes. And tell me if you see the devil looking back. Would you like me to continue with part 3? Part 3. The price of a lie. Before we continue, I want you to imagine this. You bury a secret deep in the ground, believing no one will ever find it. But what happens when the ground itself begins to move? When the buried thing refuses to stay quiet? This story is not only about sin. It is about consequences. It is about the darkness that grows when truth is locked away. If you feel a shiver already, hit that like button and subscribe, because what happens next is something history tried to erase forever. Now let us return to Lima in the winter of 1803. The Blue Room had become the birthplace of a lie so powerful it threatened to choke everyone involved. 4 women and a priest had crafted a plan. Domingo would disappear. The pregnancies would be hidden. The scandal would die in silence. At least that was the hope. Father Calderon stood before them with one last question. Where is Domingo now? Working in the carpentry shed, the Marquise answered. He does not know that we have uncovered the truth. He thinks each of us guards our own sin. The words tasted bitter even as she said them. What do you want done with him? The priest asked. And that question carried enough weight to crush an entire soul. Colonial law was clear. If a slave fathered a child with a free woman, the punishment was death. Not a private execution, but a public display of power and cruelty. A reminder of who ruled and who obeyed. Torture. Confession. A spectacle of pain. But a punishment like that would draw attention. It would raise questions. Questions that would lead to the truth. And their lives would be destroyed. Sophia found her voice then soft and trembling. Please do not hurt him. Everyone stared at her. Even the priest looked stunned. Justice must be served, Father Calderon said. But Sophia's despair finally exploded. Justice. What justice exists in this place? He dies because his existence threatens ours. Because society says a man with dark skin and chains cannot be near women like us. He dies so we can live comfortably inside a lie. His death does nothing except add more horror to what we already face. Her words cut deep. The Marquise raised her hand as if to slap her but stopped halfway. A storm of rage, grief and something close to shame passed through her expression. She is right, the Marquise whispered. His death solves nothing. It only creates more danger. We need another solution. The priest felt himself slipping into a place where righteousness no longer lived. A place where desperate choices ruled. What do you propose? He asked, his voice barely above a breath. The Marquise leaned forward, eyes colder than polished stone. Domingo disappears. Not dead. Not punished publicly. He goes somewhere far from Lima. A plantation in the north. A mining camp in the mountains. Somewhere he becomes invisible. Adriana continued the plan without hesitation. The children will be placed with trusted families in other cities. Relatives in Arequipa will take mother's child. Friends in Cusco will raise mine and Isabella's. And Sophia's child will go to loyal contacts in Trujillo. Each birth quiet. Each departure immediate. No one in Lima suspects anything. The priest counted silently. 1, 2, 3, 4 pregnancies. One too many. What about the fourth child? He asked. Silence fell like a knife. Some babies do not survive, the Marquise said in a voice brittle and cold. Tragic but believable. A single death is misfortune. 4 births without fathers is humiliation that destroys everything. Father Calderon felt his heart sink into darkness. He had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. I must speak with Domingo, he said. I need to understand why he did this. No, the Marquise snapped. You will speak to him only to tell him his fate. He has no voice. The moment he touched any of us, he lost any claim to life or mercy. Either he cooperates or the alternative will be permanent. The message was clear. Silence or death. By afternoon the confrontation began. The carpentry shed stood behind the mansion, lit by a single cracked window. The air smelled of wood shavings and oil. Domingo worked at his bench, calm, focused, unaware of the fate being sharpened behind him. Domingo, the priest said, we need to talk. The slave set down his tool slowly. He turned and looked at the priest without fear. Father, the women are pregnant, Father Calderon said bluntly. All 4 of them. They claim you were responsible. Domingo did not speak for several seconds. His face still calm but his eyes sharpening. They are lying, he said. Why would they lie? The priest demanded. Because they need someone to blame. Because the truth is worse than their invention. The priest felt cold dread creeping into his bones. What truth? Domingo spoke carefully, each sentence like a hammer striking wood. The Marquise has received private visitors late at night. Isabella's fiancé has visited months before their engagement. Adriana meets Miguel Sandoval in secret. And Sofia sneaks away to be with Pablo Herrera. I have observed more than they realize. They needed a story. I became the story. His voice held no anger. Just certainty. Why should I believe you? Asked the priest. Why believe them? Domingo answered calmly. 4 noble women, all pregnant by the same enslaved man in a house full of servants who see everything. It makes no sense. Except as a cover. The priest's world spun. Lies and truth clashed inside his skull. But the decision was already made. Logic no longer mattered. You will be sold, he said. Tonight. You will leave Lima forever. If you speak a word of this, you will be killed. Domingo nodded slowly. I understand. Truth does not matter when power decides otherwise. He paused, then added one final chilling line. But truth does not die. It waits. That night Domingo vanished. 2 hired men led him away in darkness. No paperwork. No record. Nothing but silence. The household ledger noted only a short line. Slave Domingo transferred north. No buyer listed. No witness signatures. He had been erased from history. And anyone who dared ask questions found themselves unemployed within hours. Winter deepened and the pregnancies continued. The mansion became a quiet prison. Curtains drawn. Visitors turned away. Servants whispering prayers behind closed doors. The Marquise controlled every moment with cold authority. Adriana barely spoke. Isabella cried whenever she thought no one was watching. Sophia grew more frightened every day, talking to the baby in her belly as if it could protect her from what was coming. Father Calderon visited often, and each time he left feeling that invisible hands were tightening around his throat. Then a new fear arrived from outside the house. Miguel Sandoval suddenly left for Spain without warning. Pablo Herrera vanished soon after, supposedly sent to Buenos Aires. The men Domingo accused had disappeared like smoke. Coincidence or cleanup? The priest did not know. But he began to realize one terrible truth. The deeper he went, the more the darkness grew. This was no longer a scandal. It was becoming a curse. If this story still has your heart racing, comment the word curse below. And get ready for part 4, because the real horror is only just beginning. Part 4. The Midwife's Secret. Some secrets demand silence. Others demand blood. In the quiet darkness of that mansion, a plan built on fear was about to create a new nightmare. Because the truth no one wanted to face was this: some babies fight to survive even before they take their first breath. In the mansion on the hill, November arrived wrapped in cold coastal fog. Lima's streets outside echoed with daily life, but inside those walls, time moved differently, measured by hushed footsteps, painful contractions, and whispered prayers. The household was now a separate world, ruled not by society's expectations but by fear. The midwife from Callao, Senora Medina, became the most powerful person in that house. She was older than she looked, with silver threaded through her dark hair and eyes that missed nothing. She had delivered hundreds of babies, but never under circumstances like these. She had been paid well and threatened even more. She knew exactly what was at stake. The Marquise gave birth first. It was late at night when her cries tore through the silence. The midwife worked quickly, her hands steady even as sweat dripped down her forehead. The priest waited outside the door, pacing like a trapped animal while a servant mopped his brow. Hours seemed to pass. Then a thin newborn cry filled the air. A healthy boy, strong lungs, perfect skin. The Marquise did not want to see him. She looked away, her face pale, whispering through clenched teeth, "Make it quick. He leaves tonight." The midwife hesitated. The Marquise used to hold power with smiles and invitations. Now she ruled with threats of ruin and violence. The woman who once governed her household with grace now resembled a queen on the edge of war. That night, long before dawn, the baby was wrapped and carried away by the priest and a trusted servant. A carriage with no family crest waited on a quiet road. The boy would be taken south to Arequipa, to be raised by distant relatives who would never speak his true origins. The midwife cleaned the room, burned the bloody linens, and made the Marquise promise to rest. But rest was impossible. Her motherhood had lasted less than 2 hours. The next birth came sooner than anyone wanted. Isabella's labor began only days later. But unlike her mother, Isabella did not carry herself with elegance. She screamed, cried, begged to leave, begged to die. Her fear spilled out like the tears she could not control. The midwife worked harder than before. This child was stubborn, slow to move, and Isabella's panic only made everything worse. When the baby finally came, silence followed. For a terrible moment, the midwife thought the child was dead. But with rubbing, pressing, and a quiet command to breathe, a tiny gasp answered. Isabella clutched the midwife's wrist, eyes wild with terror. "Is she alive?" The midwife nodded once. But Isabella was not relieved. She looked at the baby as if the child were a curse that needed burying. The midwife held the infant close and whispered a lullaby, comforting the newborn because no one else would. The Marquise entered the room and stared at her grandchild like a problem that needed solving. With a sharp gesture, she signaled it was time. That night, another carriage disappeared into the fog, headed toward Cusco. As days went on, the mansion became suffocating. Every heartbeat, every footstep, every breath felt like a countdown. The staff tiptoed through halls, terrified that a cough, a glance, a word could bring the entire world crashing down on them. Adriana barely spoke anymore. Her labor arrived fast, without warning. The midwife rushed to her bedside, but the situation was already dangerous. Blood soaked the sheets. Adriana bit her lips until they bled. Her pulse weakened with every contraction. The priest stood near the door, clutching his rosary so tightly that the beads cut into his palms. He prayed not for the baby, but for Adriana's life. The child arrived small, too silent, The midwife performed every trick she knew. Pressing, shaking, urging life into a fragile body. But the baby never cried. Never opened its eyes. The room filled with a heartbreak that tasted like metal and sorrow. Adriana stared blankly at the still bundle, tears rolling unnoticed down her face. The Marquise closed the curtains. "This is the one we mourn." The priest whispered a prayer no one listened to. That night, a grave was dug quietly behind the chapel, marked only by freshly turned earth. 3 babies born, 1 buried, 2 smuggled away, and Sophia still remained. Her time came last, late December, when cold winds howled around the mansion like angry spirits. Sophia had grown thinner and quieter. She spoke only to her womb. She insisted her baby was innocent, a person deserving love, not exile. The midwife found herself moved by Sophia's determination. But mercy had no place in this arrangement. The labor began before sunrise. Sophia clutched the bedsheets and screamed her child's name before the baby was even born. Hope and terror battled inside her. When the child finally emerged, a girl with strong lungs and fierce cries, Sophia reached for her immediately. "Do not take her. She is mine." The Marquise stepped forward, ready to issue the decision she had practiced for months. But the midwife raised a hand. Wait. The midwife knew something the rest did not. She had examined the child quickly and carefully. She had seen something unexpected. A mark beneath the girl's shoulder. A birthmark shaped like a crescent. A sign, old women in the Calais markets had whispered, of a child favored by the dead. The midwife stared at the infant. Something in those eyes did not belong to a newborn. Awareness. Distance. Secrets of her own. The midwife swallowed her fear. This baby must stay with the mother for at least 2 weeks. She gave the excuse of weak lungs and risk of death if separated. The Marquise, exhausted by months of fear, agreed to delay the separation. But the midwife's true concern stayed unspoken. Death was close to this child. Not as a threat, but as a companion. 2 weeks passed. During that time, the mansion changed. Doors slammed without wind. Lamps blew out though no one touched them. Shadows lingered too long. The household staff whispered that the baby was not natural. Even the priest felt watched. One night he dreamed of Domingo. Chained, eyes burning with hatred and truth. The priest woke gasping, certain the dream was a warning. Meanwhile, Sophia rocked her baby and whispered, "You are not alone. I will protect you." But deep down, even she wondered what exactly she held in her arms. The midwife packed her tools, preparing to leave the mansion forever. She wanted no part of what came next. Before she departed, she pulled the priest aside. "You should never have sent Domingo away. Because he was not the problem. The horror began long before him. And now, it has only just arrived." As she disappeared into the fog, something shifted in the air. The mansion seemed to breathe. The walls whispered. A soft cry echoed through the halls. Not the cry of a hungry infant, but the cry of something waking up. Something that refused to be hidden. Something that would make sure Lima never forgot what happened inside that house. If you want, I can now continue with part 5 in the same storytelling style and American YouTube pacing. Would you like part 5 to include more supernatural elements becoming visible? Or focus first on investigations and suspicion from outside the mansion? Just tell me your preference and I will deliver the next 1,000-word chapter. Part 5, Whispers in the Walls. A house built on lies never sleeps. It listens. It remembers. And when the truth tries to stay buried, something beneath the floorboards begins to dig its way up. After the midwife disappeared into the night, the mansion seemed to exhale a long and uneasy breath. But peace did not follow. Instead, strange things began happening in the quiet hours before sunrise. Things that could no longer be explained away by fear or imagination. Sophia refused to let her infant daughter out of her arms. She stayed awake for hours, rocking the baby while murmuring soothing words that did nothing to calm her own trembling hands. The birthmark on the child's shoulder seemed to darken each day, and anyone who looked too long at the baby's eyes felt a chill. It was like the girl saw everything at once. Past, present, and something deeper. Father Calderon started to visit every morning, claiming it was spiritual guidance. But inside, he was struggling. The dream of Domingo haunted him. In that dream, the enslaved man stood in chains beneath a storm. His voice echoed like thunder. You helped them erase me. Now the dead will remember for me. The priest tried to dismiss the nightmare as guilt. But guilt did not explain the sounds he heard during his visits. Footsteps pacing in empty rooms. Whispering under the floor. The cry of a baby that did not belong to Sophia. Servants spoke little now. Those who made jokes or gossiped in the kitchen were replaced by others who kept their eyes down and their mouths closed. The Marquise tolerated no threats to silence. She insisted every unnatural event had a rational cause. The house was large and old. The wind played tricks. People's imaginations were tiring them. But the truth was more terrifying. The walls were teaching everyone to fear the truth. One afternoon, as the sun dipped behind gray clouds, Isabella collapsed in the central hall. She whispered that she heard a baby crying in the forbidden nursery. A nursery prepared long ago for grandchildren who would never come. A room that had been locked for years. The Marquise rushed to her side. There is no baby here. The Marquise snapped, but she looked toward the stairs with a spark of uncertainty. That night, the crying returned. Louder, real, human. The priest opened his eyes in the dark and realized the sound did not echo through hallways. It came from beneath the floor. From the grave of Adriana's child. He crossed himself and whispered a prayer with shaking hands. Meanwhile, Adriana herself grew weaker. She wandered the halls at night as if sleepwalking. Sometimes the priest found her at the chapel door, staring at the earth where her baby was buried. Her lips moved silently. She believed someone called to her from below. The staff began placing candles everywhere, hoping light would keep evil away. But candles flickered out one by one even when the air was still. The mansion became a gathering place for shadows. They crawled along walls. They stretched under doors. They slithered like cold fog. Sophia tried to remain strong for her child. She whispered the same promise again and again. I will protect you. But she was not sure from what anymore. The danger did not simply come from the Marquise or from society. It came from something older and angrier. One evening, Sophia tried to sleep. She laid her daughter beside her and closed her eyes for only a moment. When she woke, the baby was gone. A scream tore from her chest as she ran through the hall. The others rushed to help with fear twisting their hearts. They followed the sound of a baby crying and found the nursery door standing open. No one had opened that door in years. Inside they found the baby lying in an old crib, calm as if she had been placed there lovingly. The room smelled of dust and old perfume. Sophia grabbed the child and held her tight. But before anyone could speak, a cold wind blew through the nursery. The door slammed shut on its own. The sound of tiny footsteps pattered across the floor toward them. But no child walked there. The Marquise shouted for everyone to leave. They fled, gasping for breath, while Sophia clutched her daughter so tightly the child whimpered. The Marquise locked the nursery again, but they all knew it no longer mattered. The house had claimed that room again. After that night, the Marquise insisted the priest perform rites through every hallway. He sprinkled blessed water. He whispered prayers. But his hands shook constantly. He sensed a presence behind him with every step. Something followed. Something angry. Something betrayed. The nightmare grew larger a few days later. Letters arrived from the north. The servant who escorted Domingo had vanished. No one knew if the enslaved man had escaped or been taken by someone else. All anyone knew was that Domingo was now missing from the world, a ghost in the empire. The Marquise burned the letter before anyone else could read it. Her voice shook when she ordered Father Calderon to keep a closer watch on the family. The priest understood what she meant. Watch for cracks in the conspiracy. Watch for confessions under fear. Watch for spirits who would ruin everything. But the priest doubted they still controlled anything. Several nights later, Adriana woke screaming. Bloody fingernail marks appeared on her door, as if someone with tiny hands had clawed to get inside. The marks were low to the ground, spaced unevenly, as if made by an infant who crawled. Adriana fainted at the sight. Isabella stopped leaving her room entirely. She stared into mirrors too long. She flinched at every sound. Her sanity was twisting under the weight of secrets and invisible eyes. She whispered that she could feel hands touching her stomach even though her child was gone. Hands begging for life. The Marquise tried to stay strong. She refused to show fear. But even she felt the curse tightening around their lives. At night she sat awake in her bed, listening as soft footsteps circled her door. She clutched a rosary. It broke in her fingers without explanation. The priest came to realize the truth. The lie constructed to protect this family had invited something worse. Something that fed on guilt. Something that demanded justice. One night he heard a voice clearly in his room. A man's voice filled with quiet rage. "I told the truth, but you buried it with me." The priest froze. He knew that voice. Domingo. And he knew the message. The dead were not done. Because lies do not stay buried. Babies do not forget the darkness they were born into. And houses do not keep secrets without demanding a price. The walls of the mansion were waking. And they wanted more than silence. They wanted punishment. They wanted truth. And they would tear the family apart until they got both. Would you like me to continue with part 6 next? I can make the horror grow stronger, bring outsiders closer to discovering the secret, and show the supernatural consequences becoming deadly. Part 6, The House of the Unborn. Some hauntings begin after death. But in this house, the haunting began the moment 4 heartbeats started growing in secret. And now one heartbeat that stopped is demanding to be heard. The city around the mansion kept moving as if nothing were wrong. Bells rang from churches. Merchants yelled through the markets. Carriages filled the stone streets. But inside the walls of the Marquis' home, time had twisted into something cold and unnatural. The staff spoke in fearful whispers. No one entered the nursery. No one looked at the chapel too long. At night, the mansion groaned like wood under unbearable weight. People covered their ears but still heard it. A voice the house could not contain. The Marquise ordered the windows sealed. Curtains remained closed day and night. She tried to shut out the world. But she only trapped the horror inside with them. Father Calderon came every evening now. He clung to prayers that no longer comforted him. He felt watched with every step. The air in the mansion was heavy, like walking through water. He demanded they confess everything. Perhaps the devil gains strength from secrets left unspoken, he pleaded. The Marquise refused. To confess now means ruin. We must endure until the danger passes. But danger did not pass. It waited. Along the walls. Under the floor. It breathed. One evening, Isabella screamed again. Her door rattled as if someone slammed their tiny fists against it. She sobbed that she heard a baby crawling inside her room. A baby with no eyes. A baby that wanted to climb into her arms and never let go. Adriana grew worse. She no longer cried. She stared blankly at the ceiling. The priest discovered she had been clawing at the floor beneath her bed. Searching for something. Or someone. Sophia tried to soothe her baby daughter as much as possible. But the child cried at the same hour every night. Midnight. The crying began weak, then rose to a piercing scream that froze everyone. And suddenly stopped at the exact same moment. Like a switch turning off. The silence afterward was even worse. The Marquise kept careful control over her own daughter. She prayed loudly every night. She walked the halls with a candle even though her feet trembled. She told herself the house would not break her. But she did not sleep anymore. One night while she patrolled the second floor, she saw a figure standing at the far end of the hall. A small shape. A child's shape. The candle shook in her hand as she squinted. The figure did not move. It only stared with a face too pale for the living. The Marquise gasped and stepped back. Her candlelight flickered wildly then died. She ran as fast as her weak body allowed. The hallway echoed with soft footsteps chasing her. When she reached her room and slammed the door shut, she pressed her back against it, chest rising and falling. And she realized she felt tiny fingerprints on her arm. Cold. Damp. Impossible. Morning brought no comfort. Father Calderon gathered everyone in the drawing room. His voice cracked as he spoke. Evil grows stronger here each day. We cannot continue this lie. We must bring light to the truth. The Marquise shook her head. Light destroys us. The truth destroys us. We will not lose everything for a mistake. Father Calderon shouted for the first time in years. The mistake was not the sin. The mistake is what you chose to do after. Silence followed those words. thick and bitter. Before anyone could respond, a loud crash came from the hallway. A servant cried out. The priest rushed outside. Isabella lay on the floor, shaking violently. Her eyes rolled back. She clawed at her stomach and screamed. He hears me. He wants me to go to him. The priest ordered the servant to carry her to her room. He tried to pray, but the words shook apart in his throat. Later that night, a new horror arrived. The marquise heard dragging sounds above her room. Something heavy scraping across the floor. The attic. Slowly. Back and forth. She called for a servant to check, but no one answered. No one dared to climb those stairs. Moments later, the attic door creaked open on its own. Dust fell like ashes, and the dragging sound moved toward the stairs. The marquise backed into the chapel, clutching a crucifix. The dragging came closer, step by step. She could almost imagine a small body pulling itself forward, by its arms only, leaving a trail. The chapel door slammed shut before the creature reached her. She heard claws scratch wood. She cried out to the Virgin Mary for protection. Nothing answered. Down the hall, Sophia held her baby and rocked with panic. The child whimpered. The air turned cold. Her candle went out. A small voice whispered behind her. Sister. Sophia spun around. No one stood there. She held her baby tighter. But the whisper came again. Closer. Sister, please. Sophia screamed for help. Her mother and the priest rushed to her room. But the baby was no longer crying. The child stared into the corner as if something invisible crouched there. Adriana appeared in the doorway, her expression blank. She walked toward the corner where Sophia was looking and knelt down, as if comforting something unseen. Her voice trembled. We did not want this. We did not want you to die. A soft giggle echoed from the shadows. Not joyful but cruel, hungry. The marquise dragged Adriana away. You do not speak to spirits, she hissed. You do not feed them with attention. But it was too late for that. The haunting had fed on every fear. It had grown teeth. When the priest returned to his quarters that night, he found a folded paper on his pillow. He opened it with shaking hands. It was written in rough charcoal. 4 lives for 1, that is the balance. He knew what the message meant. The dead child wanted siblings to follow into the grave. It wanted the family to suffer as it had. And the spirits wanted all 4. One by one, the priest fell to his knees. He confessed aloud to God and to the dark. It was wrong. All of it was wrong. And now the consequences were coming. The marquise refused to believe it. She insisted the haunting would fade. The birth of Sophia's child was proof that life continued. But she did not realize something. The birth had not broken the curse. It had fed it. Because now there was a living reminder of Domingo. Whether the women lied or the enslaved man spoke truth did not matter. The house had chosen a side. And the dead would drag the truth screaming into the light. Even if the living begged for mercy. Even if blood had to spill again. Even if the walls must crack open with every secret buried inside them. This nightmare was no longer contained in shadows. It had become the house itself. And it wanted what was owed. More than silence. More than lies. It wanted life to pay for death. And it was just getting started. If you want, I can continue right away with part 7. Would you like more deaths, more horrifying supernatural events, or the arrival of someone who threatens to expose the truth in the next chapter? Part 7. The blood-marked door. The storm outside raged like never before. Wind screamed against the ancient stone walls of the manor. Rain poured as though the sky had opened every gate at once. The trembling candles flickered inside the corridors, sending twisting shadows across the cracked wallpaper. Thomas and Eleanor stood together in the entry hall, both soaked with fear more than rain. Neither dared to speak. Neither wanted to break the tense silence that felt like a warning from the house itself. Professor Alden stepped closer to the staircase. His eyes followed the trail of bloody fingerprints earlier discovered along the handrail. The prints looked fresh. Too fresh. Eleanor swallowed hard and whispered to Thomas. How can blood remain bright after 2 centuries? Thomas shook his head because no answer existed that would make any sense. The professor raised the lantern higher and took the first step upward. His foot landed on the wood, which groaned like something in pain. Every step gave a new cry as though warning them all to turn back. Yet the truth had pulled them too deep. They had to see what waited above. The legends of Hollowstone Manor had always been many, but now those legends breathed around them. When they reached the top floor, the air was colder. Thick and heavy and ice-like. Thomas shivered, not from fear alone but from the strange shift in temperature. Breath fogged around their lips. It should not be this cold inside a sealed old house. Professor Alden pushed his glasses up his nose and pressed forward. The corridor stretched endlessly with doors on both sides. Old family portraits lined the walls. The eyes inside those paintings seemed too alive. Each pair staring, watching, threatening. Eleanor touched Thomas' arm. I do not like this. His jaw clenched. I know. Stay close. Halfway down the hallway they found it. A single door marked with a handprint. A dark crimson stain. It dripped downward as though the blood had been placed there only moments ago. Professor Alden stared without breathing. He had read about this in one of the forbidden journals. The blood-marked door. The room where Lady Margaret Hollowstone had taken her final breath. Or rather where her breath had been stolen. Eleanor stepped forward, drawn almost unwillingly by some invisible force. Thomas quickly grabbed her hand and pulled her back. The professor touched the metal knob. It burned his skin. He gasped and dropped his lantern. The light crashed to the floor, but instead of extinguishing entirely, the flame crawled unnaturally across the wood like a living tail of fire. The professor quickly stomped it out, breathing hard. Something inside the room does not want us here, he said through clenched teeth. The storm outside thundered again. The whole manor shook. A loud banging echoed from behind the door. Eleanor screamed and jumped back. Something was on the other side. Something angry. Something alive. The professor forced his hand forward again, though his fingers trembled. I must see, he said. If we leave now, the curse continues. More disappearances. More souls taken to the dark. He stared into Thomas' frightened eyes. You know it is true. If we do not face this, it will follow us forever. Thomas nodded reluctantly. Eleanor, however, backed away. Her heart pounded wildly and tears threatened to spill. This is madness. We are not meant to open that. Thomas stepped toward her. He placed a gentle hand on her cheek. We have come too far. I promise I will protect you. Eleanor felt small comfort, but she trusted Thomas. She always had, even when nightmares replaced their once peaceful lives. Professor Alden turned the knob again. This time it did not burn. The door creaked open slowly. Darkness poured out like thick smoke. It swallowed the weak candlelight. A cold breeze rushed against their skin. The smell of earth and decay seeped through the air. Inside the room a grand canopy bed stood draped in rotting fabric. The curtains hung torn and heavy with dust. A portrait of Lady Margaret hung above the headboard. Her face looked stern but beautiful. However, as the candlelight touched her eyes, something horrifying happened. The painted eyes blinked. Eleanor clutched Thomas' arm. Professor Alden staggered back. The portrait moved again. The woman inside stirred like someone waking from a very long sleep. Her lips twisted into a cruel smile. A whisper echoed from the walls. A voice both distant and near. The manor keeps what it is owed. Suddenly the door slammed shut, trapping them inside. The candles went out. Pure darkness wrapped around them. Eleanor screamed Thomas' name. He grabbed her tightly and held her close. Quiet, he said. Stay still. The portrait cracked loudly. A deep line spread from the frame to the wall. Dust fell all around. Footsteps approached from the far side of the room. Slow, dragging, hungry. Eleanor could hear breathing. A thick rattling breath like rotten lungs struggling to function. The professor fumbled to relight the lantern. His shaking hands barely managed to spark a flame. When the small light finally returned, they saw her. Lady Margaret herself, standing beside the bed in a shredded black gown. Her skin pale as bone. Her hair flowing like a shadow. But the worst were her eyes. Black voids swirling with the souls of the trapped. She glided forward. The old floorboards did not make a sound under her feet. Her gaze locked on Eleanor. A wicked hiss escaped her lips. You carry the mark. The house has chosen you. Eleanor felt her throat close. She wanted to speak, but no words formed. Thomas stepped in front of her. Leave her alone, he yelled, though fear shook his voice. Lady Margaret lifted her hand and Thomas flew backward, smashing into the wall. Eleanor cried out and rushed to his side. He groaned but was conscious. The professor stood frozen, unable to move. His mind overwhelmed with terror. Lady Margaret's voice echoed again. Blood calls to blood. The hollow stone curse must be complete. She raised her hand once more and the walls began to bleed. Red streaks poured from the cracks. The floor shook violently. The ceiling above threatened to fall. Professor Alden snapped out of his trance and shouted, "Eleanor, the diary. In your bag. Read the final verse. Now." Eleanor dug into her satchel. Her hands shook uncontrollably but she pulled out the ancient diary. The final page was written in fading ink. She tried to speak the words but her voice stuttered. Lady Margaret moved closer ready to claim her. Thomas crawled to his knees. He forced his body to stand. Eleanor managed to find her voice. She began reading the verse aloud. Each word caused the room to scream. Lady Margaret shrieked with fury. The windows shattered. The door strained as unseen power forced it from both sides. The portrait exploded behind her. A violent burst of black mist poured out filling the room with a horrible scream of lost souls. The lantern flickered again almost dying. But Eleanor did not stop. She read louder, stronger. Lady Margaret's form began to fade. Her bones cracked under invisible pressure. Her voice roared in agony. The manor trembled like it might collapse. Then silence. The black mist vanished. The bleeding walls dried. The cold air warmed slightly. Lady Margaret was gone. Thomas limped toward Eleanor and wrapped his arms around her. She cried into his chest. The professor leaned against the wall catching his breath. "We are not finished," he said. "The curse is weaker but not broken. There are still 3 parts missing." Eleanor wiped her tears and nodded. Her fear now mixed with determination. "Then we finish what we started," she said. "No matter what it takes." Outside thunder rolled again, but the storm felt different. As if the manor itself prepared for a final war. And deep beneath the floors something began to wake. The true horror. The ancient evil that controlled even Lady Margaret herself. The darkness was far from done. Would you like me to continue with Part 8 now? Part 8. The awakening beneath the manor. The silence after Lady Margaret vanished felt impossible. Too sudden. Too calm. The kind of silence that warns rather than comforts. Eleanor clutched the diary to her chest while Thomas steadied himself against the wall, still weak from the violent force that had thrown him earlier. Professor Alden lifted the lantern once more and looked around the room. "Nothing here is at peace," he said. "Not yet." Thunder rolled across the sky. The walls trembled like something deeper than weather shook the house. The professor swallowed hard. "It has started. The true evil. The one that enslaved Lady Margaret. The curse did not die with her. We only peeled away the first layer." Eleanor stepped closer to the bed where the portrait once hung. The cracked plaster exposed a dark hole. Wind or breath or something alive moved behind that wall. Thomas touched the cracked surface with his fingertips. The stone around it felt strangely warm, like skin instead of rock. He snatched his hand away with a shiver. Professor Alden studied the diary. The final pages spoke of a sealed chamber beneath the manor. A room never meant to open. The original Lord of Hollowstone had hidden his greatest sin deep below where no light could reach. A prison for something unholy. Something that fed on fear and blood and souls. A creature imprisoned so long that hatred became its only world. "We must go down," the professor said. "It is waiting for us. The curse only ends when the source is destroyed." Thomas stared at him like he might be losing his mind. "Go down there. After everything we saw here. That thing threw me like a toy. It nearly killed us." Eleanor touched his arm gently. "But if we run it will follow us. It will take others. We have to finish this." Her voice shook but determination grew inside her. She had survived the blood-marked door. She would survive whatever came next. They left the room quickly, not daring to look behind. The corridor seemed longer than before. The portraits stared with sorrow now instead of anger. Like mourners watching brave souls march to their fate. The lantern light wobbled as the professor hurried down the stairs. The storm outside screamed against every window. When they reached the entry hall, the air shifted again. The floorboards beneath their feet vibrated with distant rumbling, like the entire manor breathed slowly. The professor led them to a massive wooden door beneath the staircase. It was locked by a heavy chain and a rusted padlock. Ancient symbols were burned into the wood. Symbols meant to keep something inside. Thomas lifted a nearby candlestick holder and smashed the lock. The sound cracked like thunder. The door creaked open, releasing a bold gust of cold air. The smell was foul like forgotten graves and moldy earth. Eleanor gagged but forced herself to step forward. A narrow staircase twisted into the deep dark belly of the manor. Professor Alden lifted the lantern and they descended one step at a time. The air thickened with each level down. Their breathing grew labored. The lantern flame flickered as though warning them to turn back. The diary spoke of screams heard from beneath Hollowstone more than a century ago. Whoever went down never returned. The last step delivered them into a massive underground chamber. The stone walls were covered in carvings old and carved with fear. Chains hung from wooden beams overhead. Piles of bones lay scattered on damp floors. Eleanor felt her legs weaken. This place was not a dungeon built for people. It was built to hold something far worse. In the center of the chamber stood a circular pit sealed by iron bars. Red light flickered from below like a heartbeat pulsing from the earth itself. Thomas whispered a prayer. The professor moved closer, studying the runes welded into the metal. His voice shook as he read. "This is the ritual seal. The one the Hollowstones created to imprison the demon." Eleanor stared at him wide-eyed. "Demon," he nodded. "The curse is not just a haunting. It is a hunger. A force that consumes and grows." A tremor rocked the chamber. Dust rained down. The iron bars vibrated loudly. A deep growl echoed from the pit. A voice ancient and angry. "The house frees me. The curse awakens." Thomas stepped back in horror. Professor Alden stumbled toward the wall, flipping through the diary. "We have to read the counter-ritual before it breaks loose." The stone beneath their feet cracked. The bars bent outward. Something massive struck from below. A hand clawed through the gap. Not human. Flesh dark as shadow. Nails like blades. It roared again, the voice shaking every bone in their bodies. The lantern light died. Eleanor screamed for Thomas. She grabbed blindly in the dark. His hand found hers, gripping tight. The professor continued reading aloud, though panic overtook his voice. The chant echoed against the walls, colliding with the roaring demon. Red lightning shot up from the pit, exploding against the ceiling. The iron bars snapped. A monstrous figure began pulling itself upward. Its head emerged first. Horns twisted like dead branches. Eyes burned with bottomless hate. Its mouth spilled black smoke instead of breath. It rose to full height, towering above them. Chains clattered around its limbs. The demon spread its arms wide and laughed. A sound of pure torment. The professor choked on his words. "My God, the Hollowstones never defeated it. They only buried it alive." Eleanor pulled Thomas toward the stairs. "We have to escape. Now." Thomas nodded, but before they reached the first step, the ground collapsed. A massive crack cut the room into two pieces. Eleanor and Thomas fell to one side while the professor fell to the other. Professor Alden screamed as the demon moved toward him with terrifying speed. Thomas climbed to his feet, ready to run back to help, but Eleanor held him tight. The professor met her eyes with desperate sorrow. "Go. Finish what I started. Do not let it take another century of souls." Before they could respond, the demon consumed the professor in a swirl of darkness. His scream echoed until nothing remained of him. Tears streamed down Eleanor's face. Thomas held her as she cried. The demon stepped slowly toward them, each step making the chamber tremble. Eleanor opened the diary. Her hands shook, but she forced herself to read the next verse. The demon roared, enraged by the sacred words. The pit glowed brighter. The remaining iron bars melted like wax. The stairs behind them shifted. Stone crumbled away. Escape grew impossible. Thomas looked into Eleanor's brave, terrified eyes. "If we die," he said, "then we die stopping this monster. For everyone who ever suffered here." Eleanor nodded, wiping tears quickly. "Together then." She spoke louder, stronger. The demon lashed out with a blast of dark energy. The chamber shook. The walls cracked. Bones shattered under the force. But Eleanor did not stop. She would not stop. The demon howled in fury. The final battle was waking. And the manor knew. The darkness was rising to claim all. Would you like part 9 next? I am ready to continue the story anytime. Part 9. Blood of the Curse. The demon towered above them, its shadow swallowing the entire chamber. The red glow beneath its feet pulsed like a living heart. Eleanor kept reading from the diary, her voice trembling but unbroken. The ancient words flowed faster, guided by something greater than fear. Thomas stood beside her, gripping a rusted chain, ready to defend them, even though he knew the weapon meant nothing against that creature. The monster roared, its breath turning the air as hot as fire. Each step it took shook the ground. Eleanor felt her lungs burn. She forced the next line out louder. Her voice became the only light left in that darkness. The demon twitched as if the words struck a nerve. Its claws scraped the floor, leaving deep wounds in the stone. It tried to speak, but the ritual overpowered every attempt. Words of the sacred tongue forced its hate back down its throat. It staggered. Just for a moment. That moment felt like hope. Thomas pulled Eleanor behind a broken pillar as the demon unleashed a wave of dark energy. The blast shattered the ceiling and caused a rain of rocks to fall. Eleanor shielded her head while Thomas dove across her to protect her from falling debris. A scream echoed somewhere above them. The house itself cried in terror. Eleanor flipped to the final page. The counter-ritual required a sacrifice. Blood of the cursed, blood of the bound, blood of the Hollowstone line. She stared at those words in disbelief. The Hollowstones built this prison. Only their blood could end the curse forever. Thomas noticed her face pale. "What does it say?" Eleanor whispered. "We cannot finish it. We do not have Hollowstone blood." Thomas hesitated, then looked around at the chamber. Symbols carved by terrified hands, stained by blood spilled by imprisoned souls. He took a slow breath filled with dread. Someone survived that bloodline. Someone whose blood awakened the curse again. Eleanor followed his eyes. And then suddenly it struck her. Lady Margaret. The woman who died in the bedroom above. She was the last Hollowstone heiress. But she is dead. Thomas shook his head. There is someone else. Before he could say the words, the demon lunged. Thomas grabbed Eleanor and pulled her away, but one of the creature's claws sliced the air beside them, knocking Thomas across the chamber. Eleanor screamed his name. His body hit the ground with a sickening thud. The monster turned toward her, its eyes burning with infinite hunger. Eleanor crawled backward, clutching the diary. The demon reached out, ready to crush her, but something stopped it. Its head snapped toward the stairs that led up into the house. Footsteps rushed down into the chamber. A lantern illuminated a familiar face. Senora Vargas, the housekeeper. Her breath came in panicked bursts. Her hands clutched a rosary so tight that her knuckles turned white. Her eyes locked on the demon. Her voice cracked. "I knew it. All these years. The secret kept beneath us." The demon growled, recognizing her presence. The creature spoke with a voice that rumbled like earthquakes. "Hollowstone blood. Come to me." Eleanor felt her heart stop for a second. Senora Vargas stared at the floor as if the truth she had hidden all her life finally rose to surface. "My grandmother was a Hollowstone maid," she whispered. "A maid who carried shame in her belly. A child born from the master of Hollowstone. A child raised without a name. My blood. The curse belongs to my family." Eleanor understood. Senora Vargas was the missing key. The bloodline that never died. The demon grinned, sensing the connection to its ancient prison. It began stalking toward the housekeeper. Eleanor jumped to her feet and ran to Thomas. He groaned weakly, clutching his ribs. "We are not done," she told him. "This is our chance." Senora Vargas wiped her tears, stepped forward and raised the rosary high. The holy symbol glowed faintly in the blood-red light. With the conviction of a survivor, she shouted ancient prayers passed down by her grandmother. The demon stumbled, its growl turning into a furious shriek. The manor shook violently. Paintings upstairs crashed to the floor. The storm outside screamed. The house wanted revenge for centuries of torment. Eleanor opened the diary again. The ritual required the blood willingly given. Senora Vargas nodded, already understanding. She pulled a broken shard of metal from the ground and cut her palm. Blood dripped onto the stone floor where the symbols awakened, glowing bright like fire. The chamber roared alive. The demon howled in agony as chains of pure light reappeared, wrapping around its limbs. Each link burned into its flesh, causing smoke to rise. The beast fought, clawing at the glowing restraints, but the blood of the Hollowstones was stronger than its rage. Thomas forced himself upright, using the pillar for support. He shouted at the demon. "This is for the professor. For Lady Margaret. For every soul you tortured." The demon lunged but stumbled as the chains tightened. Eleanor continued the chant, illuminating the chamber with the ancient language. The ritual pulled energy from every corner of the manor. The ghosts of the past appeared in the dim red light. Pale figures of Hollowstone victims. They gathered around the pit, whispering the sacred words with Eleanor. Their faces no longer showed fear but peace. Their time for justice had come. Senora Vargas suddenly screamed. The wound on her hand burned brighter. The blood flowed faster. She fell to her knees. Eleanor rushed to her panicked. Stop. You have given enough. But the old woman shook her head. No, to end something so evil. The cost must be paid. The demon broke one of the glowing chains. It howled and reached toward them again. Thomas grabbed a heavy beam and struck its arm. The demon turned and hit him with its tail, launching him across the chamber. His head hit the wall. He went silent. Eleanor screamed again. Tears blurred her vision. She clutched the diary. Her voice cracked but she kept speaking. She spoke through fear, through heartbreak, through determination that death could not silence. The last line of the ritual burned from the page. It demanded one final act. Eleanor lifted the shard from Senora Vargas' hand and cut her own palm. Two bloodlines now flowed into the ritual circle. Cursed and innocent together. The light exploded. Chains shot from the pit, wrapping fully around the demon, dragging it downward. The creature screeched in pure rage. Its claws scraped the stones, leaving long scars. It fought the ritual but failed. The pit roared like a volcanic eruption, swallowing the monster piece by piece. Senora Vargas collapsed, but she smiled. The demon lashed out one last time and its talon slashed across Eleanor's arm. Pain seared like fire, but she did not stop. She screamed the final word of the rite. Silence slammed into the chamber. The red glow vanished. Only the echo of the demon's last scream remained. And then even that faded away, swallowed by the earth. Eleanor looked around, breathing hard. The pit sealed itself. The chains melted back into ancient runes. The evil was gone. The curse finally defeated. But the cost lay heavy before her. Senora Vargas lay motionless, eyes closed, peace finally claiming her. Thomas did not move either. Eleanor crawled to him, tears crashing down her face. Thomas, please, wake up. She pressed her hand against his cheek. He remained still. The curse was finished. But the nightmare might not be over. Part 10. The Price of Silence. Darkness drifted through the ruined chamber like smoke as dust settled from the battle. The silence felt wrong, heavy and too quiet after everything that had happened. Eleanor knelt over Thomas, his chest still and his skin pale. She pressed her ear to his heart, praying to hear even the faintest beat. For a moment nothing, then a soft thump, a slow fragile rhythm. Thomas was alive. Eleanor gasped in relief. She shook his shoulder gently. His eyelids fluttered and he exhaled a weak groan. You are still here, she whispered, her voice breaking. He tried to speak but only managed a faint smile. She looked over at Senora Vargas. The brave housekeeper lay perfectly still, her eyes closed, her expression peaceful. Eleanor knew without touching her that the woman had given every last breath to protect the world above. The chamber around them seemed to sigh like an ancient beast finally released from pain. The runes carved into the floor faded from fiery red to cold gray. The monstrous pit that once glowed like a wound sealed itself, leaving no trace of the horror that surged from below. The curse was broken, but the cost would never fade. We need to leave, Eleanor said, trying to help Thomas to his feet. Together they climbed the broken steps into the house above. Every hallway looked different now. The walls did not groan anymore. The air felt lighter, though it was still soaked in sadness. When they reached the first floor, the storm outside had stopped. Moonlight gently poured through shattered windows, illuminating the grand entrance with a holy silver glow. It looked like a graveyard of memories. Voices echoed faintly overhead. Eleanor tensed, ready for more terror. But instead the voices soothed her heart. The professor's voice. Confused. Reawakened. Eleanor rushed up the stairs with Thomas limping behind. In the guest chamber they found the professor slowly sitting up, the color returning to his face. He looked around as if waking from a nightmare. Eleanor, did we succeed? Eleanor nodded, though tears still poured down her cheeks. He took her hand and squeezed it tight. They helped one another out of the cursed house. When they stepped outside, the wind carried away the lingering stench of fire and blood. The manor stood silent but no longer evil. It was only a house now, stripped of its monstrous heart. Still something urged Eleanor to turn back for one last look. And what she saw made her entire body go still. In the highest window of the Hollowstone Manor a figure stood watching them. A tall silhouette, graceful and composed. Lady Margaret, her ghostly form framed by moonlight. She did not look angry anymore. She looked free. She lifted her head in a silent thank you. Then her form dissolved into the night like smoke. The house sighed as though releasing its final breath. Then it stood empty. Forever empty. Days later the authorities arrived. They asked questions. They inspected the house. They searched every room. They found no demon, no chains, no pit, no records of horrors endured by those long gone. Only ruined walls and a story no one wanted to believe. But there was the body of Senora Vargas. The official report claimed heart failure. Quiet, natural. They buried her with no family to mourn. But Eleanor placed a single white rose on the grave. "You saved all of us," she whispered. "And history will never know how much we owe you." Thomas recovered slowly under Eleanor's care. His laughter eventually returned, though his nightmares never fully stopped. Some wounds do not heal even when the monster is gone. The professor wrote everything down, his hands trembling through every page. But when he finished, he locked the manuscript in a drawer and swore never to publish it. The world was not ready to know the truth. Not yet. Eleanor returned to her university studies, but she was not the same student anymore. The shadows of Hollowstone Manor followed her everywhere. At night she dreamed of chains and claw marks. She woke with her heart pounding, remembering the demon's roar. Sometimes she heard whispers from the diary, though she burned its pages to ashes. But she also remembered Lady Margaret's soft smile. And the souls freed from the depths of torment. Those memories helped her breathe again, helped her believe she had done something good in the midst of unbelievable darkness. Months passed. One winter evening Eleanor visited the grave of Senora Vargas again. Snow covered the ground and silence filled the sky. She placed another rose on the headstone. This time the wind curled gently around her, carrying a whisper of warmth instead of fear. Eleanor closed her eyes. "You deserve peace," she said. Then she turned and walked away. The Hollowstone Manor remains empty, still standing on the outskirts of Lima, its windows reflecting memories of a cursed history. Locals refuse to go near it. Children dare each other to touch the iron gates, but most run away before their fingers reach the metal. They do not know the truth. They only feel it. The ground beneath the manor remembers every soul that died in chains. The walls remember every scream. And the darkness remembers the demon that once fed on blood and fear. Eleanor hopes that memory sleeps forever. But some nights when the wind blows just right and the moon hangs low, there are whispers beneath the earth. The dead do not always stay silent. And curses sometimes leave roots too deep to ever fully remove. One thing is certain: history forgot the victims. It forgot the heroes. It forgot the secret buried deep below the Hollowstone estate. But the darkness did not forget. And it is always waiting for someone foolish enough to open the house and wake what sleeps beneath. Thank you for watching this full dark colonial nightmare. If you love this historic horror story, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe to our channel and leave a comment sharing your favorite moment. Your support helps us bring more chilling tales from the haunted corners of history to life. I fire.